from Cabo Verde. Let me recall, before I hand over the floor to the panelists, that while yesterday we focus on the meaning of resilience as applied to the ocean economy and on the impacts from climate change to the ocean, today we will focus on the policy approaches to foster greater economic and climate resilience. Let me recall the three questions that we highlighted for today's conversation. First, what are the key avenues for reducing emissions from ocean-related sectors? The second question is on policies that can improve the resilience of coastal communities to climate. And the third question is whether or how can ocean-related policies and regulation contribute to economic resilience. We have asked our panelists to provide a 7-8 minutes initial presentation, and then we'll have the chance to have a Q&A. We will invite you to submit your questions in the chat, and we will pick some of the questions for the panelists. So I will start with Susie. Let me ask you the following. You are a former Minister of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries in Indonesia. As a former minister, you have led an impactful policy to reduce illegal fishing, among many other things. But what are, in your opinion, the key climate impacts on Indonesia's ocean economic sectors, especially on the fisheries sector, and what are the steps that the government of Indonesia has taken to help mitigate them and to increase the coastal communities' resilience? So the floor is yours for 7-8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. George Moreno da Silva, and everyone that's attend this webinar. So actually, I feel not really in charge to speak tonight because it should be new Minister of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, but I could give the experience from what we had that time, policies taken to measure the revitalizations on fisheries and also continue increase the protecting marine area, increase the normal, traditional, artisanal fisheries, and a better and more sustainable fishing industry, and also the economy from its fisheries. Of course, I see that the policies to be in place is very important to continue to sustain the marine resources and its economy, not only for Indonesia, but is also for the world. Everyone aware that Indonesia has 68% of tuna, an example, breeding zone for yellowfin, and as well as many other species. But since Indonesia is so close with so many neighboring countries that's living from fishing industry, so it is very tough to put in place the measure and also the policies, because every policies that's against intensive fishing or industrialization fishing is always against the business, and the business will put pressure on the government to change its policy. So it is not easy, and I see just 1 year after I'm done with my post, and all the policies that in place is changed. What we had that time is within Indonesian EEZ, actually the maximum size of vessel, an example, is 200 gross tonnage for fishing. and then we ban on transshipment. And then because that's the only way illegal fishing is happening and continue its business, because the transshipment is there. So by doing that, we increase almost double our fish stock. And the tuna on the first year, just the experience, what we can see how the nature and the climate, the climate is reversed back, become more flourished, is that in the first year, the artisanal fisheries, the people that do handline fishing, they get tuna 17 to 27 kilogram. The second year, they increase to 30 to 40 kilogram. And then the third year is 50 to 60 kilogram, one fish. And then in the fourth year, they start getting the 90 kilogram yellowfin. So you can see there, that's the size of the fish itself is increased, and the fish stock is increased, and everything is back. We can see from the whale, and also the sharks, whale fish is coming more. And that's the sign of environment is recover back. But yes, we push away more than 13,000 foreign vessels that fish in Indonesia. Basically 10% are legal, they basically buy the license, but the 90% are not buying the license. While in 5 years everything recover, the tuna industry recover, the business recover, the coastal fisheries is amazing. I think the blue crab and also the coastal fish demersal is also increased triple, even more the numbers. So, but yes, the pressure is very strong there. We get demonstration from the business player who basically work with the trawlers, the bottom line bed nets. They all put pressure, but we can make it in 5 years. Basically, the export increase almost 200%. But yes, everything now back. Every single vessel that stopped fishing on 2015 are now start getting back. The trawlers are getting back. The coastal fisheries start declining just in 2 years. So not 2 years change, everything is start declining. So my question is, here I get the question, but I would like to also give question to the panel. Will the policy of Indonesia that's giving recovery of its resource, which is for one single migratory fish, yellowfin, an example, the breeding zone are 68% of them is in our Maluku area, our Indonesia Sea. So how can the world or the international community put influence or also care or also concerns that when a country cannot protect their resource is also a threat of the world resource? As we always say, one world, one ocean. So there is no separation between ocean in Indonesia or ocean in Europe. The end, they are one circulated oceans. So what I see lately was really concerned me a year before my period terms end. We are realizing that around our EEZ, everyone is putting a fish aggregative device. That is very dangerous for the ecology of the fish. it changed the habit and the living how you call it, cycles of the fish. It's more than, I think if I'm not mistaken, more than 50,000 fish aggregative devices had been placed in around Indonesia EEZ, because they cannot enter our water anymore and fishing inside. So they do the fish aggregative device around the border. So, and I do believe once the tuna decline, anything else will decline. And the declining of its species, one or two, it will be followed with more. And when this has happened, the cyclus is, the ecosystem is taken away pieces, it will disturb the whole ecosystem. Basically, the environment of the sea, everything will change sooner or later. But right now, I don't see that the sustainability of this resource is actually, it must be concern of the world. It must be concern of all of us. So how can, I don't know, international community, I know here there is also the business international community that push the policy to be open, to be more relaxed, to be more friendly to businesses. But sometimes when you talk about natural resources, that we still cannot, how you call it, revitalizing it in basically in-house breeding, you should protect the natural resources in its nature. So in this matter, I would say, can the policy of a country, it's also should become concerns of the world, of the international community. Because when we are helpless here to see the thing change and taking back, like reset back to before 2014, where the illegal fishing is basically massive, and Indonesia lost business. And we only work from the faname, the farming, the shrimp farming, and we have the natural resources, the tuna, the red snapper, and many other, as well as also an example, the reef fish. The reef fish was my concern because Hong Kong is continue taking the coral reef trout, which is here, they do fishing by cyanide, by potassium cyanide. And this also a threat. And the reef life, the ecology of the reefs, the tuna living cycles, and all those other resource on fisheries in Indonesia is basically right now is back on threat to be less how you call it, less flourish. So how can we put policies in this matter to protect the resource of Indonesia, which is also resource of the world? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, but we have to ensure that we have the time available to all speakers. I think that it's the perfect segue. The point that you made about the role of the international community and the cross-country perspective, it's precisely the point that I would like to address to Professor Svein Aagason. You are an expert in fishery policies. What is the number one action that governments can take to improve the ongoing resilience of fisheries, given how climate impacts are likely to compound with other pressures on fish populations. And by the way, this is something that one report that we are producing regarding Indonesia is outlining. And what could be the role of the international cooperation in supporting these efforts, which was the point made by Susie just a couple of minutes ago. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity to speak at this workshop. I don't think there is any one action that governments can take, but I think the approach taken should be based on the principle of precaution. And first and foremost, I believe it is essential for authorities to have a good plan for how to deal with the impacts of climate change. And in that respect, I think the following steps are quite essential. And first, of course, to understand how climate change is affecting the marine environment, both the direct effects on growth, development, mortality, distribution, and the indirect effects on the ecosystem through productivity, structure, composition. A second step would be to understand the trade-offs involved, both as regards the impact climate change can have on different fish stocks, temporal trade-offs, and socioeconomic, ecological trade-offs involved. And the third step is to realize that increasing awareness of climate impacts does not mean that other problems caused by human pressures like overfishing, pollution, habitat degradation have disappeared. We will continue to have scientific uncertainty and incomplete understanding of stock dynamics, although our knowledge is thankfully improving all the time. And climate change will simply compound the situation facing fisheries management. It is very important when we're talking about climate change that we have evidence and mechanism for climate effects that are well established and credible before they can influence management advice. And there is also the danger of exaggerating the climate effect. So blaming the wrong primary driver for results can result in blaming the wrong primary driver for the things that we observe, changes we observe in the environment, can result in the wrong remedial action being taken. So I think to reduce the impact of climate change on fisheries, the most important thing would be to reduce fishing mortality. And we should address both fishing and climate change jointly, as they are strongly interrelated. And we do know that loss of biodiversity and reductions in demographic and geographic structure due to fishing increase the sensitivity of fish stocks and marine ecosystems to climate change. What we can do is that we can incorporate these steps more formally into a kind of climate adaptation plan that could be, for instance, developed in co-creation with stakeholders. Could follow a three-stage process. First, we would identify risks and opportunities. Then we would identify the adaptation measures, and then we would make them operational. Now, in a recent paper, Critchell et al. Have suggested that having a responsive harvest control rule in which fishing mortality changes with measured changes in biomass builds inherent resilience to adverse effects of both climate change and scientific uncertainty. And this is a simple way to improve the resilience. But it is, of course, conditioned on having sound knowledge on the marine ecosystem. Conservative harvest control rules that become more precautionary as stocks decline, they do inherently respond to productivity changes, even if the change is very subtle, as we can have in climate change. Of course, we have been moving towards more complex ecosystem-based models, and that can attend to both habitat, species interaction, and other ecosystem components, as well as socioeconomic impacts. But the design, the implementation, the interpretation of the results, it takes time. And time is simply something that we may not have. So in another paper by Gaines et al., they have noted that climate change will have force global fisheries to an important crossroads in the coming decades, and that these changes can either be met proactively, or we can risk undoing what we have been accomplishing so far. And it does, of course, heavily depend on the stocks in question. What's the shape of the stocks that are being confronted by climate change? Are they in good shape or are they in bad shape? Because if they are in poor shape, then there is inherent risk that not doing anything will further deteriorate cause the stocks to deteriorate. In a paper last year by Free et al., they outlined guiding principles for climate adaptive fisheries management. And the first principle is simply, and this is very related to what we had heard earlier here in this session, to implement the best practices in fisheries management. Well-managed fisheries are more resilient than poorly run fisheries, and they will mitigate many of the negative impacts of climate change. Attention has been focused on, in some cases, on rights-based management, such as the individual transferable quota systems, the ITQs, or territorial user rights. These define property rights, they incentivize long-term stewardship, and have been shown to promote compliance, prevent overfishing, and improve economic performance. And the key thing here is that these systems, they align the long-term interests of stakeholders with the long-term interests of the authorities. And that is very, very important. And the second principle is based on the fact that adapting to climate change will require dynamic, flexible, and forward-looking management. And there is special need to align the spatio-temporal scales of climate change, ecosystem change, and socioeconomic responses. We do have tools that managers or authorities can use. They can envision and prepare for alternative futures. They can use near real-time data as they become available for proactive and dynamic adjustments to management, spatial and temporal management. And they can use harvest control rules that are robust to changing environmental conditions, like I mentioned before. And we can test these management procedures using management strategy evaluation. The third principle is about fostering international cooperation. I will deal with that in a little while. And the fourth centers on building socioeconomic resilience by introducing measures that facilitate flexibility, both as in alternative fisheries or alternative livelihoods, possibly better assets also, enhancement of fishing technology and capacity, better organization through multi-level governance or community-based management, etc. And then policies that promote agency and learning. We can incorporate, for instance, local knowledge or foster a sense of stewardship. It is important that I can take an example here from Iceland. Here in Iceland, we have the fishing industry, one of the pillars of the economy. So the fisheries management has been designed to ensure responsible fisheries, focusing on sustainable utilization of the fish stocks and good treatment of the marine ecosystem. And it is based on extensive research on fish stocks and the marine ecosystem. And in this way, we have the Icelandic fisheries management system is therefore well equipped to deal with the impact of climate change because it is characterized by good management and it is based on good science. And that is very, very important. Now, as regards the international cooperation, this has been very important for fisheries management, as there are numerous stocks, like we heard just about the case from Indonesia, that are utilized jointly by many nations. And we have here in the Northeast Atlantic several large pelagic stocks, herring, mackerel, blue whiting, jointly harvested by Norway, Russia, Faroe Islands, Iceland, UK, and the EU. And shifting distributions have already caused serious impact on those fisheries and conflicts, and not armed conflicts though. And the countries involved have not been able to come to an agreement on total catches as well as quota allocations. The catches have consequently been larger than ICES has been recommending, and consequently the Marine Stewardship Council has now revoked the Northeast Atlantic mackerel, herring, and blue whiting certificates. So what will happen? Well, climate change will make managing the straddling stocks even more difficult, and new and strengthened international institutions and agreements will be necessary. Countries and regional fishery management must be willing to share data to identify, describe, and/or forecast how stocks will shift. And the countries involved must also be willing to use this data for collaborative management. And the third, of course, and the most difficult task, it will be to convince the nations that cooperation is necessary and that the notion of zero sum, where one loses and one gains, should be abandoned. results from ClimateFish, the recent research project on the impact of climate change on fisheries and aquaculture in Europe, in which I participated, indicate that stakeholders in the Northeast Atlantic pelagic fisheries are mostly concerned with the increased complexity in negotiations on allocation of shared stocks and overfishing of shared pelagic stocks as nations unilaterally set quotas. So we may need to broaden negotiation, introduce side payments, allow new players into the negotiation as stocks migrate into new territory. We must have some kind of mechanism for this to be able to flow without hindrances when the stocks migrate. And if international cooperation remains difficult, some authors have mentioned that countries may need to resort to some kind of measures to protect their stocks. They might.
Mr. Anderson, if you could conclude.
I have 2 lines left. Marine protective areas across borders, for instance, or ban fishing until adaptive management measures can be put into place. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And indeed, your last words regarding cooperation are really aligned with the recent report that we produced on the need to enhance cooperation. For example, only 1% of official development assistance, ODA, in support to developing countries is targeting a sustainable ocean economy. So clearly there is much more need to do more with public resources, but also fostering the private sector investment through innovative financing. Excellent point. So now I would like to move to Malik, Mr. Malik Duarte Lopez, the president of the board of the Institute of the Ocean in Cabo Verde. Cabo Verde, as we all know, is a small island development state that is highly affected by the impacts of climate change, but also is a big ocean state which is placing high political priority on developing a sustainable ocean economy. I've exchanged in other occasions with your Prime Minister and seeing that Cabo Verde is clearly positioned as a front runner on this agenda. So my question to you, Malik, is what steps is Cabo Verde taking to diversify its economy and build resilience through its ocean economic sectors, and how is it making sure that its ocean economy sectors contribute to meet international climate targets? So the floor is yours.
Thank you, George, very much for this opportunity in OECD as well to take part in this very interesting and important ocean climate ocean Nexus workshop. So to begin with, just a very short introduction of the Sea Institute. As president, I would like to say that the Sea Institute is responsible for coordinating and performing marine applied research and technological development in the sea domain and in its resources. We are also national technical authority in such fields as oceanography, aquaculture, marine and fishing biology, fishing statistics, fishing technology, etc. So just to give a quick insight for those who don't know where Cabo Verde is or anything about Cabo Verde, just to say that it's an island country with an EEZ estimated at 750,000 square kilometers. It's around 186 times the land surface. So it has an extensive coastline and a privileged geoeconomic situation. The sea is the main source for its resources and of great potential in terms of goods and services that can be associated from it. Cabo Verde is a small island, but also a large ocean developing state. The westernmost in Africa, approximately 555 kilometers from Senegal. It has a land surface of 4,033 square kilometers, 10 islands, 8 islets, and a coastline of 1,020 kilometers. So to say that, to highlight that Cabo Verde is over 99% sea. So we share borders with, our borders are defined with all countries in the sub-region with a population of approximately 550,000 inhabitants. But George, I would like to say that there are major challenges of Cabo Verde as a small island in a large ocean developing state, as it has a strong dependency on the international market. Over 80% of the food products in Cabo Verde are imported. Also, the service provision has a high cost per capita. We are quite vulnerable to environmental and economic shocks with high costs of the adaptation to climate change when compared worldwide. Our insular nature, being an archipelago, implies numerous economic, social, and environmental challenges and vulnerabilities as well. There are also challenges arising from climate change that affect Cabo Verde, of course, as the sea level rise is one of the biggest challenges for small island states, as it would affect coastal areas and their resident population, the habitat, the biodiversity, the industrial activities, tourism, and the coastal infrastructure as well. Meeting demand for drinking water in Cabo Verde will be strongly compromised under most climate change scenarios. That requires greater investments in water production through seawater desalination. For example, in 2016, about 80% of drinking water consumed in Cabo Verde came from desalination process. Another challenge is the rise in seawater temperatures and ocean acidification that are impacting the ecosystems on which our islands depend on for food and economic development. In terms of measures, I want to outline that the fact that our national strategic plan for sustainable development sets in programmatic, in operational terms, the vision and objectives of the government of Cabo Verde on a 2030 target. So that assures that its ocean economy sectors contribute to meeting international climate targets, since the strategic plan is aligned with the UN SDGs. So two of the main objectives from our national strategic plan for sustainable development is to make Cabo Verde a circulatory economy in the mid-Atlantic, and also to foster a sustainable economic and environmental development. And the way this is being done is by shifting the country to a blue economy model. So there are strategic instruments being created. It has just been created at the moment for blue economy transition. This by the creation of a Blue Economy Observatory in 2018 with technical assistance from FAO and the funding from African Development Bank. So it's very interesting that the vision and appropriate measures were undertaken way before the pandemic, as it already represented a form of economic diversification. It's since 2018 with the creation of the Ministry of Maritime Economy, it shows as a focus and aim for the country to tend towards a blue economy. I'm not going to go into the instruments of this Blue Economy Observatory, just say that we have instruments created now, that is a unified strategic framework for blue economy. We have a national blue economy investment plan, and also a blue economy promotion program. So this will all help in this shift of the country to a blue economy model and diversify its economy. Cabo Verde's positioning as a maritime platform of reference for the transition to a blue economy, as being the first and foremost, as I mentioned, the creation of the Ministry of Maritime Economy. That was the first big step in its agenda and goal to, for example, develop coastal and maritime spatial planning to promote innovative and resilient industrialization in infrastructure within the framework of port and maritime platforms as well, in its structuring of ports to support international trade between continents. Also to develop the concept of blue ports are major challenges for the future of coastal areas. We also want to promote we are promoting inter-island maritime transportation as a factor in the development of value chains that integrate the national economy. We also promoted ocean health by creating warning mechanisms for pollution of the ocean, raising awareness in the private sector in the health of the beaches and ensuring sustainability of coastal zones, and also promoting the creation and the full management of marine protected areas as sources for the renewal of Cabo Verde's fish stocks. There are different strategic intervention fields for blue economy. For example, the port and coastal infrastructure, marine and coastal environment, research and development, of course, tourism and ecotourism, renewable energies, marine safety and security for sure, fishing and aquaculture to relieve the stress on our stocks, and also maritime transportation. Just to name out some other crucial measures that have been taken. For example, the foresight in terms of education and adaptation of public and private institutional capacities for blue economy. We have just recently created around August last year, the Sea Campus that is consisted of the 3 pillars, the Technical University of the Atlantic for higher education, the Sea Institute, as I have mentioned, for marine applied research, and also the Sea School for professional training in the sea domain. We are also in terms of creating a special maritime economic zone that aims to transform Cabo Verde into a maritime logistic platform, and taking various measures, for example, supporting materials for fish landings, proper transportation of fish in cold storage systems for fish, increase of safety at sea with the distribution of fishermen safety kits. We are also increasing the catches and incomes through the distribution of boat kits, remote sensing and geolocation equipment, etc. On the fishing sector, many aspects and measures are being undertaken. Just to resume very quickly and say that what we are aiming for is a sustainable growth through blue economy. The blue growth, as we call it, in the objectives are very clear for us. The strategic objectives to preserve the marine fauna, and that is by preventing overfishing through selective measures, methods, closed seasons, individual fishing quotas, minimum sizes, also valuing bycatch, reducing unreported and unregulated fishing, creating appropriate laws and policies, of course, creating more marine protected areas, and managing and better management of the ones we already have, restoring overfished fisheries, certifying sustainable fisheries, and developing aquaculture is very important at this moment. So I think my time is up. I will stop here and wait for further questions that I can hopefully answer. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Malik, and thank you for your comprehensive presentation of the concrete steps and actions that the Cabo Verde is taking to overcome vulnerabilities, but also to take full benefit of this sustainable ocean economy. Last but not the least, we have the Nathalie Hilmy from Monaco. Nathalie, could you tell us a bit more about the opportunities from emerging ocean sectors for diversifying the economy? So about this diversification of the economy perspective, and therefore building resilience based on this diversification. And then also about progress to date regarding reducing greenhouse gas emissions from shipping and other key ocean economy sectors at international level. So you have conducted research in this area, and we are all eager to learn from you. So the floor is yours. I would follow the same, the new reference. So we are no longer talking about 7-8 minutes. All speakers took 10 minutes. So you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. It's for me a real honor to be with you today to represent Monaco. I will switch to French as it is possible to reply to your questions. Tout d'abord, l'océan absorbe plus de 90% de la chaleur qui pénètre dans l'atmosphère. Il fournit plus de la moitié de l'oxygène que nous respirons et il procure des avantages en matière de santé et de bien-être à des millions, voire des milliards de personnes. Sans l'océan, l'homme ne pourrait pas exister sur Terre. Maintenant, quand on parle d'économie bleue, on pense tout d'abord au secteur de la pêche. En effet, la pêche concerne la sécurité alimentaire, qui est un des objectifs du développement durable des Nations Unies dans l'agenda 2030. En effet, le rapport spécial du GIEC, le rapport sur les océans et la cryosphère dans un contexte de changement climatique, le SROC, dans lequel je suis auteur principal, explique que 15% de l'apport en protéines de plus de 4,5 milliards de la population mondiale provient des aliments marins. De plus, de nombreuses populations dépendent du secteur des pêches pour leurs moyens de subsistance. Dans de nombreuses nations insulaires et zones côtières, il n'existe que peu, voire pas, d'autres possibilités d'obtenir les nutriments fournis par le poisson. Selon un rapport de la FAO sorti en 2020, plus de 60 millions de personnes sont directement employées dans la pêche et l'aquaculture. De plus, la pêche à petite échelle joue un rôle fondamental dans le développement des communautés côtières et de leur bien-être. Ce n'est pas seulement le cas dans les pays du Sud. En Islande, par exemple, les activités liées à la pêche représentent environ 25% du PIB. En termes d'empreinte carbone, les systèmes de pêche et d'aquaculture bien gérés ont en fait un impact beaucoup plus faible que de nombreux autres systèmes de production alimentaire. Par contre, dû au changement climatique, certaines espèces vont migrer. L'impact économique sera différent selon les localisations. Différentes études et le rapport AR5 du GIEC ont émis l'hypothèse qu'il y aura des gagnants et des perdants dans le cadre du changement climatique à court terme. Les pays situés dans les régions tropicales et tempérées, en particulier ceux qui sont adjacents au centre-ouest de l'océan Pacifique, au centre-est de l'océan Atlantique et à l'ouest de l'océan Indien, devraient être les perdants, avec une diminution potentielle des captures de 20% d'ici à 2050, notamment dans les récifs coralliens. Les gagnants sont censés être les pays situés dans des latitudes plus élevées, tels que la Norvège, le Groenland, la Russie et les États-Unis, notamment l'Alaska, avec une augmentation moyenne de 30 à 70% du potentiel de capture. Or, les communautés fortement dépendantes de la pêche liées à des écosystèmes particulièrement sensibles au changement climatique, ayant une importance cruciale, comme les récifs coralliens, seront plus exposées. Il est donc extrêmement important de lutter contre tous les stress écologiques dans l'océan, y compris le changement climatique, qui pourrait impacter ce secteur de l'économie bleue. Il faut impliquer tous les acteurs économiques. Par exemple, la sphère financière commence à s'intéresser à la défense de l'environnement et à la protection des océans. Selon la Banque mondiale, de plus en plus d'investisseurs souhaitent démontrer l'impact positif de leurs investissements, ce qui nourrit donc une dynamique vertueuse. La finance bleue est une forme de finance durable qui est appliquée au milieu marin. La finance durable repose sur une vision éthique à long terme de l'investissement financier. Elle cherche donc à concilier performance économique et impacts sociaux et environnementaux positifs en finançant des entreprises qui contribuent activement au développement durable. Il est important que l'humanité et les décideurs politiques comprennent la valeur des espèces et des écosystèmes. L'autre secteur auquel on pense aussi, en parlant d'économie bleue, est celui du tourisme. C'est un secteur économique extrêmement important pour beaucoup de pays, mais sa soutenabilité dépend beaucoup de l'environnement. Par exemple, d'un côté, dû au changement climatique, la réduction des zones de glace de mer dans l'Arctique et l'Antarctique augmentera leur accessibilité, favorisant les opportunités et les demandes de tourisme marin et de croisière, mais mettra aussi en danger les organismes endémiques vulnérables aux espèces introduites via le tourisme. D'un autre côté, toujours en citant le SROC du GIEC, il a conclu que le changement climatique avait un impact négatif sur les écosystèmes côtiers, augmentant ainsi les risques pour le tourisme côtier, en particulier dans le cadre des scénarios d'émissions élevées, et a confirmé que le changement climatique aura un impact économique plus fort sur les pays en développement qui dépendent du tourisme comme principale source de revenus. Il faut donc penser à l'écotourisme et au tourisme durable comme solution possible. Le rôle de l'éducation est aussi important pour faire comprendre aux touristes l'impact de leur comportement face à la nature. Dans le même ordre d'idées, le SROC a conclu que le changement climatique aura un impact négatif sur les valeurs immobilières des propriétés et des infrastructures côtières, en particulier dans les petits États insulaires en développement tropicaux, par le biais de pertes physiques directes et de dommages causés par l'élévation du niveau de la mer, l'augmentation de l'intensité des tempêtes, avec des ouragans, des cyclones, les vagues de chaleur, les inondations, les sécheresses et autres événements extrêmes. Des catastrophes naturelles se sont déjà produites dans le monde entier, coûtant d'énormes sommes d'argent au gouvernement, d'où la nécessité de restaurer les milieux dégradés et d'aménager le milieu côtier, par exemple avec du béton, compatible avec la vie sous-marine pour la mise en place de digues ou le développement de cultures d'espèces comme la posidonie pour repeupler les zones dégradées, pour stocker le carbone et permettre l'épuration des eaux de mer. Ce sont d'ailleurs ces solutions écologiques qui ont été retenues pour les travaux d'extension en mer à Monaco, où on a transplanté des posidonies et des nacres en développement des technologies qui n'existaient pas auparavant. Pour attirer de nouvelles espèces de poissons et les stabiliser, on a aussi des solutions innovantes, telles que les récifs 3D, imaginés par l'ordinateur pour répondre à des besoins spécifiques de certaines espèces. Cela implique donc des créations d'emplois dans la recherche et le développement, l'ingénierie et la construction, donc le BTP. Pour répondre à votre question sur le shipping, les émissions du transport maritime devraient augmenter de 120% d'ici 2050 si les autres secteurs réussissent à se décarboniser, ce qui pourrait représenter 10% des émissions mondiales de gaz à effet de serre d'ici 2050 dans un scénario de statu quo. Le rapport spécial SROC a conclu que le changement climatique aura un impact considérable sur le commerce mondial et les voies d'accès, et donc créera des opportunités économiques pour l'industrie du transport maritime et les croisières, ce qui peut entraîner des risques imprévisibles pour les communautés humaines dépendantes de cette industrie et pour les écosystèmes vulnérables. Par exemple, la diminution de la glace de mer dans l'océan Arctique pendant l'été ouvre de nouvelles routes pour la navigation internationale, comme le passage du nord-ouest ou du nord-est pendant plusieurs mois par an. De plus, l'introduction d'espèces non indigènes peut avoir un impact négatif sur l'économie et l'écologie des régions concernées. Néanmoins, le secteur du transport maritime peut réaliser d'importants gains énergétiques et réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre en utilisant des technologies existantes telles que le carburant à base d'ammoniac généré par l'énergie solaire, le méthanol, éthanol ou l'hydrogène ou le biofuel. D'autres secteurs de l'économie bleue sont aussi concernés par la problématique de réduction de gaz à effet de serre. Tout d'abord, l'énergie, puisque l'extraction de combustibles fossiles est l'industrie océanique qui a le plus contribué à l'économie océanique, représentant plus de 30% de la valeur de la production mondiale de l'océan. Cependant, les émissions anthropiques de carbone dues à la combustion de combustibles fossiles accélèrent le changement climatique. Pour relever le défi de l'atténuation des effets du changement climatique, l'énergie renouvelable des océans est une alternative croissante et fiable aux combustibles fossiles et comprennent les vents du large, les marées, les courants océaniques, les gradients thermiques, les vagues, les gradients de salinité, et les biocarburants algaux. Le rapport spécial ESROC a conclu avec une confiance élevée que le développement du secteur des énergies renouvelables atténuerait les effets du changement climatique et offrirait des opportunités économiques, et a déterminé avec une faible confiance que l'efficacité des installations d'énergie renouvelable marine pourrait être affectée par des changements des conditions climatiques telles que les vents et les vagues.
Ali, si vous pouvez conclure, 10 minutes sont passées déjà. Merci.
Oui, donc oui, je peux peut-être attendre les questions. Je voulais encore vous parler des ressources minérales. Donc, il faut faire très attention aux moyens utilisés pour extraire les ressources minérales. L'océan aussi regorge de ressources médicales, puisque nous avons des écosystèmes marins qui offrent une grande diversité biologique et qui comprenant une variété d'organismes marins qui sont recherchés pour de nouveaux médicaments. Et puis, il ne faut pas aussi oublier la valeur culturelle de l'océan. On parle beaucoup d'économie, mais il faut aussi penser aux aspects culturels. Il est donc très important de préserver nos océans et il faut lutter contre tous les effets néfastes pouvant l'affecter de toute urgence, puisque nos économies et nos sociétés en dépendent fortement. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Many thanks to Natalie Hilmi for this insightful contribution, bringing also this dimension of the greenhouse gases emission on shipping, which is one of the most critical elements for the climate negotiations. I'm aware that Susi Puchisasi will need to leave. She has
Leave, yes. Apologize.
But many thanks again for having made the time to be with us. We have received.
Welcome.
Thank you. So we have received a series of questions, and of course I'm having some difficulty in selecting all questions. I've made some effort in selecting a couple questions. I think that we will not have the chance. I think that you'll need to leave now, Susie, or can you still take one question?
Oh yes, sure. I can. Yes.
Excellent. So I can start with you, and then I will ask our other colleagues to answer to some other questions. So there was one question in the chat about what new management tools have been used for enforcing marine protected areas, and what indicators are being used for measuring success. So if you could address this topic of new management tools, it would be helpful. Another question, I think directly linked to your intervention, is what is the position of blue carbon stocks in conservation planning in the complex social ecological system in Indonesia? So if you could touch these 2 points, I would welcome. Of course, there were many other questions, but maybe these 2 could be a good start.
Well, what we have done before was continue increase and fulfilling the commitment for 20 million hectares marine protected area, and also we continue fighting illegal fishing. I heard the minister are still also continue cooperation with the Global Fishing Watch for sharing the FMS data, which I think that's also should be enforced by many countries to be able to share the vessel monitoring system, because that is good on tackling global wide for illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. The third, I heard the ministerial also continue making the marine debris policy action to tackle the plastic and pollutions. And other than that, I heard they also will start on managing stricter on trawlers, but I'm not sure about this, but that's what I heard so far. We continue, I think we are planning until 25 million hectares marine protected area. What we have done already in my time was 20 million marine protected area, but yet it's still a lot of work and problem from the day-to-day practice on fishing especially, and the continuously increase on opening shrimp farming. And we also try to do how to manage the mangrove area. It's not taken more by the increase on the shrimp farming. So that's so far what I understand. I did not follow closely on the government new policies because the minister are still new. I think it's less than 6 months. I will follow up later and what the newest planning. But what I see, the marine protected area continue committed Indonesia in this matter, and also for the marine debris policies, we continue introduce to several regional government on using less single-use plastic, and many regional government also make the regional regulation. And what lately I heard is also re-managing on the trawlers fishing net. So other than that, I haven't followed much yet. And I think the Global Fishing Watch on sharing the VMS is very good for initiative international community if more country willing to share its data of the vessel, especially the fishing vessel. So on that part, we can work together on tackling the illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. And I think for that, it's need the international to cooperate together and enforce it harder, because otherwise the illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing will drain out the resource. And I do believe when so many resources, the fish species are gone or declining, that will affect very, very much into the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susie, and many thanks again for your participation. Colleagues, there were several references from a series of speakers about fisheries, and I would like to invite you, so a bit of commercial here, to read the new OECD review on fisheries produced from my colleagues from the TAD Directorate. It provides some key data on support to the sector and recommendations on how to stop financing and sustainable fishing, supporting ongoing WTO negotiations. So I'm sure that this evidence that has been produced can help not only governments, but also other international organizations reshaping this agenda in this critical time. So let's continue with the Q&A. And again, Susie, many thanks for your participation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm very glad to direct a question to Svein. Again, many questions, and please feel free if you want also to pick any other question that is in the chat. But there was one question regarding the ecosystem-based approaches to fisheries management. Is a very needed base intervention in fisheries management. So this has been made clear in several occasions. But are there some successful case studies of this EAFM contributing to sustainability of capture fisheries? So this is one question that was addressed that maybe you want to take, but I'm glad to also to ask you in a second round other questions that are being tabled. So Sven, the floor is yours.
The ecosystem-based approach, of course, is very interesting, and the main problems I think that we have encountered is that it is very data demanding, and the models, they can become quite large, and there have been a number of projects and research outcomes that have been done on these models. There are a few different models that have been tested in the world. We here in Iceland, we have been under the auspices of our friends and colleagues in Australia, developing a model based on Atlantis, which is a very, very large model. And the models, they can be very complex, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to replicate what's happening in the marine environment, and that means it becomes very data demanding and very large. And I don't think that at the moment that I can say that there may be cases in Australia, but I'm not really completely familiar with how much the ecosystem-based approach has been used precisely this aim that you mentioned. But there have been we have been developing these models to look at things like climate change. We have been doing that in our research project ClimeFish that I mentioned. We were developing models to be used for aquaculture and fisheries in Europe. So there are several case studies that have been done there where we have been using some of these models. So it is, and I think also there are examples from Australia and possibly New Zealand. So definitely there are models that have been employed, but they are quite large, as I said, data demanding. And the thing is that we have been trying to find this middle road between complexity and adaptability. And that is we are closing in on that middle road, but we are not quite there yet, I think, but we are getting there. And the case studies that I have mentioned in Europe, they have been illuminating in that respect.
Thank you very much, Sven, for bringing this ecosystem-based management perspective. Now I would like to invite Talik for a question that is very much related with your initial intervention. Curbing illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing is a priority. You have made that point. What measures is Cabo Verde taking to improve the capacity to effectively patrol and control its exclusive economic zone, and what's the experience from this from this effort? We know that this is a quite difficult context, but your experience would be very helpful for this panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. As you said, it is very difficult. It's a big threat for the country. As I had previously explained, we are above 99% sea. We are a large ocean state, so it's by the means we have, they're not sufficient. They're not enough to attend to all the monitoring that needs to be done in our EEZ. So of course, it poses a big threat until now, and many things are being done on that level. We are Cabo Verde is part of the action plan to combat illegal and unreported fishing in FAO. That is one of the measures we have. We use our defense ships in order to help monitor our seas in our EEZ, and beyond that, we also know that these illegal activities are not only done on an international level, but also on a national level. That is something that needs to be pointed out as well. So in terms of measures in this field, in our concern, we have the Coast Guard that does a great job, but of course it is not enough concerning our EEZ, our large EEZ, and so much more has to be done. It needs to be updated in terms of new agreements and possibly use experiences from other SIDS and other countries as well, and as Indonesia that has been mentioned here, for Cabo Verde to seek other ways of addressing this problem that is still a big threat. So just to be very clear about it and upfront, it is something that is being addressed seriously and being thought out forms of international agreements that could help with this nature of problems.
Thank you very much, Malik. Now I have one question in the chat for Natalie. Well, in your presentation, your first point was about the economic diversification and its impact on building resilience. So the question is about marine aquaculture. So we have been talking a lot about fisheries, but not as much about aquaculture. So in the chat, someone is asking regarding measures to ensure compatibility and coherence between efforts being played on marine aquaculture and the sustainable economy. So if you feel comfortable to take this point on aquaculture, I think it would be helpful.
Oui, bien sûr, je vais répondre à la question. En fait, je n'ai pas beaucoup parlé du problème de l'aquaculture parce que souvent on pense à l'aquaculture comme une solution à la pêche. Et c'est vrai que l'aquaculture actuellement fournit à peu près la moitié de tout ce qui est poissons et fruits de mer à la population mondiale. Et elle est en expansion puisque la population est en train de croître également. Même avec une gestion des pêches durable, est-ce qu'on ne pense pas que ça va complètement, on peut vraiment produire de façon soutenable plus de fruits de mer. De toute façon, certaines aquacultures comme le saumon par exemple a été très controversée. Bon, après on peut penser que c'est effectivement possible de créer des fermes de shellfish par exemple pour fournir un habitat pour d'autres espèces. Il filtre aussi l'eau de mer, absorbe le carbone, donc ça peut être un moyen, l'aquaculture. Maintenant, c'est vrai que c'est un sujet qui reste quand même assez controversé quand il n'est pas bien fait. À ce propos, je voulais parler de ce qu'on organise à Monaco. Nous pensons organiser un workshop sur un atelier international et multidisciplinaire en octobre 2021 sur le carbone bleu côtier et d'autres processus biologiques marins comme solution aux impacts écologiques et socio-économiques des changements liés au climat dans l'océan. Et nous allons aborder évidemment ces solutions venues de la mer comme les mangroves et leur co-bénéfice avec l'aquaculture. Donc notre atelier va se concentrer sur l'utilisation des processus biologiques marins pour améliorer et atténuer le changement climatique, leurs avantages et leurs inconvénients. Il fera le lien entre les connaissances scientifiques et les lacunes du concept de blue carbone, carbone bleu, pour répondre plus largement aux besoins des décideurs politiques et de la gestion des écosystèmes, justement en matière d'approche intégrée fondée sur la nature, ce qu'on appelle les nature-based solutions, que vous allez aborder dans la session suivante, combinant l'atténuation du climat à d'autres avantages. L'atelier examinera donc la faisabilité de l'utilisation d'une série de processus biologiques océaniques liés au cycle de carbone, non seulement la végétation côtière enracinée, mais aussi les macroalgues, y compris les laminaires, ainsi que la productivité et l'exportation du phytoplancton, pompe à carbone biologique, en évaluant leur contribution potentielle à l'atténuation du climat et comme solution aux impacts écologiques et socio-économiques des conséquences liées au climat dans l'océan. Voilà, je voulais aussi rajouter ce point. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. So I would propose the following. This panel has been about policy. You have shared with us the policy approaches. I have one question that maybe could be a question for all panelists before we wrap up. The question is, what do you need to, what do you think needs to happen in the ocean economic sectors so that they contribute to building back a more sustainable and resilient economy? So the approach is obviously on policies, but now that all governments are designing new policies to build back better, what do you think would be fundamental on the ocean economic sectors to contribute to this new agenda of going beyond recovery and ensuring the compatibility between job and growth with inequalities and climate and environmental protection? I know that the question is quite broad, but if you could share, in addition to your initial remarks, a few other points on this, I would appreciate. Maybe we can follow the same order as before. So we could start with Svein for your last words on this point, please.
Thank you so much. Just before I reply to this, I just wanted to mention, when we were talking about ecosystem-based management before that, I forgot to mention all the work being done in North America by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So they have been doing a lot of case studies on the work of ecosystem-based models and case studies. I think the fundamental thing that we are facing is that we have to learn, we have to improve the management, and we have to help nations learn from one another. We have to help nations acquire data from one another and interpret them in the correct manner. And most of all, we have to think about incentives. The two things that spring to mind to me are incentives and long-term thinking. And we have somehow, through management, through the improved knowledge, simply by telling people the importance of long-term thinking and management system and international cooperation that foster long-term thinking, that is the key to making the oceans more plentiful in the future. So in very short, that would be my first and main point.
Thank you. Really important points, and if we talk about data, policy, incentives, and long-term thinking and cooperation, obviously you can rely on OECD also to support all of you in this agenda. I fully echo Svein's point on a toolkit for this build back better, for this blue recovery. Malik, the same question to you. So linking the role of the economic sectors on ocean economy with this need to build back better.
Sure, George. I believe we believe that our nations should work in a very coordinated and synchronized way, as it has been said here. We are all connected. It's one big ocean at the end that connects everyone, and we have seen through many things that happen that we're all connected, and the ocean influences each other from different parts of the world. We also believe that in this cooperation in synchronization, there should be a data share in a very transparent way to help research and to help understand what is going on around the world concerning climate change and pollution as well, the ocean health. All countries should be engaged in the same way. We know that the ocean health it impacts countries in different ways, depending on its geophysical features. And in the case of Cabo Verde as a SID and other SIDs, we know that we have a great responsibility of sending out the message and showing what is happening to these vulnerable countries, small island developing states, when all of these things are happening to our ocean. We also think that it's beyond pollution. It's more about before halting everything, the anthropogenic effect of mankind on the ocean. We should think about restoration as well, because the pollution has reached the point that it's still going to have heavy effects in the long run. So we should also start thinking about restoration and start betting on other forms of getting our protein and other resources from the sea, on aquaculture, especially aquaculture to relieve the stress on our stocks. And I'm speaking on a worldwide level, and also on investing in more marine protected areas. Cabo Verde, for example, just joined adhered to the agenda 30 by 30 by the Ocean Alliance to turn 30% of the world's ocean into marine protected areas by 2030. So I believe that if we all work in a very coordinated and organized manner and with transparency, we can achieve this in the long run for the livelihoods, our livelihoods, and for our future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Malik, and thank you again for making this point about seeds being quite vulnerable to climate change and natural disaster, and also to biodiversity losses, but also being home of a vast potential for sustainable ocean economy, and the need to have more cooperation in this. Natalie, if you could also share your perspective on the role of policies on the economic sectors in this recovery phase, I would welcome. Thank you.
Oui, je pense que la durabilité de notre système économique dépend beaucoup de la durabilité de l'écosystème et de la biodiversité. La présomption que la nature est abondante et gratuite a imprégné notre pensée et nos systèmes économiques. Cette croyance a conduit à une approche extractive de la nature, ainsi qu'à la pollution de notre terre, de l'air et de nos océans, aboutissant finalement à la crise climatique actuelle. Lorsque quelque chose est supposé être gratuit et abondant, il est généralement supposé avoir un prix de zéro dans notre système de marché. Ainsi, la valeur de la nature pour notre propre bien-être n'a pas été prise en considération dans nos systèmes financiers et économiques. Au prix de zéro, bien que précieux, il n'est pas surprenant que la nature soit perdante au profit d'une activité humaine qui valorise l'extraction et la destruction du monde naturel. Mais comme indiqué précédemment, ce paradigme actuel établit une base de référence avec une fin désastreuse. Alors que la Terre continuera d'exister, notre propre existence est en danger si nous continuons avec ce comportement. Tous les cris des défenseurs de l'environnement, des écologistes, des éthiciens, des biologistes et des amoureux des animaux sont tombés dans l'oreille d'un sourd jusqu'à présent, alors que nous continuons à détruire la nature en toute impunité. Prendre du recul par rapport au précipice implique un changement fondamental dans notre pensée et notre comportement. Il est encore temps d'agir, mais nous devons agir maintenant pour protéger ce que nous apprécions et ensuite aider à régénérer ce que nous avons perdu. Voilà, je vous remercie.
really sorry, I lost the connection, and unfortunately I was not able to listen to the last comments made by Natalie. But I would like to thank all the panelists for this participation, especially the focus that they have put on policies beyond financing. We all know that in many occasions when we discuss this sustainability and resilience perspective on ocean, we tend to have our eyes too much focused on the speed meter or on the potential of the sustainable ocean economy, and not so much on the policy reforms and transformation that are needed, as well as the cooperation that is needed. So I'm really glad that our panelists focus much more on policy, transformation, collaboration, evidence-based cooperation, rather than on financing. Of course, this is just one element of a broader discussion that is taking place in the seminar. So I hope that we manage to be complementary rather than redundant with our other discussions that will continue. And again, I would like to thank my colleagues from the Environment Directorate and the Portuguese delegation at OECD for inviting us to join this session. Thanking all the panelists and all the participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. And now welcome to the fourth and last substantive session of this workshop on resilience and the ocean and climate nexus. And in this fourth session, we will be discussing and exploring how we can build resilience through nature-based solutions. So I would love to invite the speakers of this session to please turn on their cameras. My name is Piera Tortora, and I work at the Development Cooperation Directorate of the OECD, where I lead the Sustainable Ocean for All initiative, which aims to support countries transition towards a global sustainable ocean economy that also the poorest and the most vulnerable countries can benefit from. And very recently, we have published a new report, which is a collaboration with with the Environment Directorate colleagues and with the Science, Technology and Innovation Directorate colleagues, which is called Harnessing the Benefits of Sustainable Ocean Economies for Developing Countries. Today, I'm delighted to be joined here by three distinguished and highly knowledgeable panelists, with whom we will delve into the session topic. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Stephanie Ockenden, Head of the Ocean and Climate Change Policy and International Evidence at the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs of the United Kingdom. We also have with us Chip Cunliffe, Director of Sustainable Development at AXA XL and co-chair of the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance. And we have Catherine Gamper with us, economist and policy analyst on climate change adaptation at the Environment Directorate. So nature-based solutions have recently gained momentum in the international policy discourse as a way for simultaneously enhancing ecosystem health and achieving also socio-economic benefits. Because many natural ecosystems have the capacity to act as net carbon sinks, conserving and restoring them has been recognized as an important part of the climate change mitigation agenda. And this is also true for coastal ecosystems such as mangroves, salt marshes, seagrasses, which are significant carbon sinks. In fact, some studies suggest that while these ecosystems make up for only 2% of the global area, their capacity to sequester carbon is actually 10 times more effective on a per capita, on a per area basis per year than the capacity of forests. And besides carbon sequestrations, these coastal and marine ecosystems provide a multitude of other benefits, including storm protection and resilience, water quality, and biodiversity. So I would like to start our discussion today by turning to Catherine. Catherine, you have recently authored an excellent study on nature-based solutions for adapting to water-related climate risks. And you will also shortly publish another study on adapting to a changing climate in the management of coastal zones. So, Catherine, building on this fresh research that you have led on, could you please help us situate a little bit this discussion, set the scene, and tell us a little bit more about how nature-based solutions can help build coastal resilience and contribute to emission reductions? Catherine, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Piera. I do my best to do all that. If I miss anything out, please, raise your hands and ask questions, and I'll be here throughout the session. I'll try to share my screen. Piera, if you could nod your head gently if once you see it, that would be great. Can you see it?
I can see that you have started to share the screen, but I can't. Yeah, now I can see it, yes.
Excellent. All right. So my name is Catherine Gamper, and I coordinate the Task Force on Climate Change and a lot of its work underneath it as well. So I'm very pleased today to bring to you some findings of multiple of our projects that we've been working on in the last couple of years. So, first of all, as Piera said, the presentation draws on two different pieces of work. And in fact, it's very nice to have the opportunity to bring those two pieces together to you today, because it seems quite relevant to your discussion. And we're very pleased to also let you know that both reports have now been released as we speak today. So we're very happy about that. And I'll share the link to those at the end of my presentation. So when it comes to coasts and oceans and climate, in fact, what Piera alluded to is actually quite a significant concern to all of us working on climate risks and climate change adaptation, because coasts are not only vulnerable as such in terms of their natural ecosystems and their exposure to one of the major risks, such as sea level rise and connected flooding and storm surges. But unfortunately, coasts have also been among the most attractive settlement areas for humankind since a long time ago, but they've seen increasingly rapidly development over the last few decades, which brings us to a point now today where almost half of the world's population live along coasts. And of course, there's different definitions of coasts, but if we take a definition of, for example, coastlines or shorelines, and going up to 50 or 100 kilometers inside shorelines, that's the figure that this corresponds to, more or less. And 75%, so a large share of the largest world's agglomerations are by the coast, such as New York and Tokyo and Sao Paulo and so forth. And along with that socioeconomic expansion, and obviously the reason for these socioeconomic development to have expanded so rapidly is not just because coasts are incredibly beautiful and offer quite a wide range of well-being factors for people. They are obviously also provide a lifeline to a lot of coastal livelihoods and communities, economic activities, directly and indirectly. Part of which is, for example, shipping. 80% of globally traded goods are shipped through ports that lie on the coast. Fisheries, the numbers vary quite a bit, but the majority of fish stocks that are being caught are done so near shore, and obviously then brought to shore along the coasts, in which coastal communities are heavily implicated and benefit from. But then apart from that, obviously, there's a lot of natural resource extraction, energy generation, and tourism going on the coasts. In the US, for example, there's a staggering number of 85% of tourism revenues that's generated by coast and coastal tourism development alone. So so there's a lot of economic activities closely related to the coast and hence exposed to the risks that we're concerned about. However, this massive socioeconomic expansion has led to significant environmental degradation along the coast over the past few decades. From what we've known and what our estimates are today, over half of global coastal wetlands have been lost since 1900. Over 1/3 of marine fish stocks have been depleted. 90% of the waste that we generate through nearshore activities are going directly into the coastal waters and degrade coastal ecosystems by doing so. And as we see in many major agglomerations, we observe rapid land subsidence, and that is due to groundwater extraction, which makes those major agglomerations not only sink gradually, but steadily so, but at the same time being subject to sea level rise. So the pace at which we expect them to be inundated by the sea is much, much faster than for those that don't have the land subsidence problem. And of course, and on top of all these sort of complex developments, we see climate risks rising. And we see climate risks, unfortunately, rising the fastest and the most concerning along coasts in terms of obviously multiple factors that are being interrelated. Among them, we have sea level rise, we have coastal storm surges and flooding, and we have water warming that in itself sort of multiplies some of the environmental degradation factors I was mentioning just now. So if we look at some of the numbers, they're also quite staggering. Since 2000, what we've observed, storms have killed over 200,000 people along the coast and costed, on average, $1.4 trillion globally. By 2100, we expect coastal flooding to threaten 360 million people and cause up to 4% of global GDP on an annual basis. So we're looking at quite a big exposure along the coasts as it stands today, and without any sorts of adaptation, without taking any sort of adaptation measure into account, of course. And there are multiple interconnected risks to higher coastal water temperatures. They exacerbate some of the problems such as coral bleaching and death, the loss of coastal habitats, critical coastal habitats, and of course the increased ocean acidification to the increase of carbon dioxide stored in the ocean. And that in turn will have consequences for all the economic activities that are today sustaining livelihoods amongst the coasts. So why do we want to talk about nature-based solutions? Well, nature-based solutions are what we think is in our area of work, some of the low-hanging fruits to actually look at when we want to think about different adaptation options going forward and thinking about different options to protect coastal communities effectively. And why? Because, I mean, perhaps, I don't know to what extent this community has talked about nature-based solutions, but there's been a lot of buzz around them. So there's a need for us, before we start talking about the concrete measures, to explain what we mean by them. So over the last 2 years, we sort of came up or set up, aligned our definition with some of the definitions that are out there by the IUCN, by the European Commission. And we define them as solutions or measures that protect, sustainably manage, or restore nature with the goal of maintaining or enhancing ecosystem services, and with the goal to address a societal challenge. Why do I emphasize that? Is because for the way we look at NBS, or why we use the term NBS in our sphere or in our discussions, is because we think of them as having a co-benefit for achieving socioeconomic objectives. So we exclude sort of measures that are purely there, for example, to conserve a forest or to conserve a different natural habitat. So sort of the large conservation activities for us typically would not fall under what we call nature-based solutions. So that's perhaps quite an important distinction to make before I get into the examples. When we talk about coastal nature-based solutions, what are they? What do they consist of? And on my slide, I give a few examples, such as, for example, wetland restoration and management, revegetation or reforestation in river mouths along the shoreline, And then obviously mangrove restoration and multiple activities that help us protect and restore marine ecosystems, such as salt marshes and such as a sort of the composition of shellfish on the coasts and so forth. So there's multiple manners and ways to use nature-based solutions along coastlines, and these are really just to give you a few examples. And then why we think of them from an adaptation viewpoint is obviously first and foremost because we want them to help us reduce our exposure to climate risks. And they do so in helping us reduce wave heights. They help us stabilize shorelines, which obviously is a major stressor and culminating driver to coastal climate risks. And they provide important buffer zones when we see coastal flooding or storm surges. They help us create more buffer between socioeconomically developed areas and the zones that are immediately exposed to the risk. Well, from what we know, and these are very rough global estimates, they need more analysis in our view in the future. But from what we know, and these are sort of impressive numbers, an estimated 35% of people that are exposed to coastal flooding today benefit of some sort from natural storm surge protection, including coral reefs and wetlands and so forth. So while we may think that these nature-based solutions are small in scale, we can see on the global scale that they have a massive potential to help us contribute to our different protection measures. They may not be the only solutions. And as you know, there are important discussions about the need for more radical measures in some areas, such as coastal retreat, but they are important, at least in some communities, intermediary measures in the next 50 and 100 years before considering more radical steps, which we may need to in some areas around the world. Now, while they offer impressive benefits in terms of climate risk reduction, and here I pull up another couple of numbers that we were able to find through our research, such as mangroves are estimated to protect 50 million people globally from coastal flooding, and coastal wetland protection in the US, and the US has particularly impressive numbers and works on the benefits of NBS for coastal protection. It estimated that it helps prevent $600 million US in direct property value and during the damages of Hurricane Sandy, for example. So also impressive numbers there that we see from specific case studies. And apart from offering this considerable protection from climate risks, we acknowledge NBS, and we would like to promote NBS obviously for their multiple co-benefits as well. As Piera was saying in the beginning, coastal areas in coastal ecosystems provide some of the most significant carbon sequestration potential across the different ecosystem types that we have on our planet. Then they help us significantly purify water, which is a big issue due to coastal water pollution due to the socioeconomic pressures along the coasts. They provide important habitat creation for coastal species, as mentioned in the beginning. And quite in general, they help us improve the land quality along coasts, which in turn are obviously important or key if we want to sustain coastal activities that we have today. And last but not least, there is more and more analysis and work being done on their ability to generate economic output and contribute to job creation. Why? Practitioners need those numbers because they're often confronted with comparing nature-based solutions or having to justify nature-based solutions in comparison to a gray infrastructure. And gray infrastructure, such as coastal defenses, we have built for decades. We know the number precisely of how much they cost, how much they will cost to be maintained, and what they can bring in terms of protection. So to be able to compete and show value to policymakers, those figures are crucially important, and our countries are calling us, in fact, to do more work on that, to help them make the case for nature-based solutions. And again, a bit underlining the argument that Piera mentioned in the very beginning, there's more and more work being done to look at how NBS can help us foster linkages between climate change adaptation and mitigation, which for those that may not only work on climate, have really been two separate policy sectors over the last decades, and where countries have an interest in bringing them together more as we go into the future, for one particular reason, and that's effectiveness, policy effectiveness. So if there are measures in which we can capture both, and we can sort of try and mitigate climate change from it impacting the environment, and in reducing those impacts that we can no longer avoid, I think that you will not find many policymakers going against the argument. So it's an easy sort of it's an easy argument for us to make. And here you can see an excerpt of one of our papers that we developed last year that looks into the NBS linkages, adaptation mitigation linkages across a whole range of domains. So not just coastal, but including forests and all kinds of and sort of all kinds of ecosystems. In our work that Piera has mentioned, and on which a report will come out in a couple of weeks, I believe, we actually looked at two specific country case studies, the United Kingdom and Mexico. And why did we do so? Why did we choose to sort of look specifically into a country context and NBS? Is because we wanted to have a bit of a closer look at how countries are fostering NBS in their national policy frameworks, and where to identify a bit where their challenges and gaps lie. And from that work, we actually wanted to highlight two good practices, one coming out of the UK in the Wallasey Island, where a big coastal restoration project was used to actually address issues such as sea level rise and biodiversity loss and so forth. And this is a project for anyone that's interested, that has received sort of a massive amount of attention, because it shows very well, especially in the case of the UK, the potential of protecting coastal communities. Another one we highlighted for our presentation today is the one in Quintana Roo in Mexico, in which ecosystem restoration was fostered by the tourism industry, by the insurance industry, and the government, in an attempt to sustain not just the ecosystem services, but coastal protection against significant hurricane risk, and obviously tourism in the long run, which is a main source of revenues in that region of Mexico. So now I've told you all the good things about nature-based solutions, and I wish the picture was as rosy as in reality as I'm trying to paint it here. But from what we've seen in our work is that actually there are several obstacles facing nature-based solutions nowadays. That there's very low awareness of amongst those that actually can use it, of what they are and how they can be used, where they can be applied. They have the perception of being difficult to implement, of being technically demanding, and there's a very low evidence on their effectiveness, as I mentioned before, especially in terms of being able to quantify their benefits, which has led, in our research, that's what we find, to them being often applied on a small scale in one-off projects, and certainly not mainstreamed across different sectors where they can actually be used and facilitated. Hence, in our view, a lot more work is needed to address some of the bottlenecks, and those bottlenecks, they can be found in relation to governance arrangements, and in relation to policies, in relation to regulatory requirements, but also technical capacity and funding. And for everyone that's interested, please go and take a look at the works for more details. And as I said, I'm here for the remainder of the session in case you have any questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
And thank you so much, Catherine. Let me just remind everybody attending that it is possible to ask questions through the Q&A. And indeed, the panelists will be staying with us, and there will be a chance for them to answer the questions at the end. Thank you so much, Catherine, for this very comprehensive and this great presentation. I think it's great to have some indications about what is actually the alarming rate at which coastal ecosystems have been degraded. And also probably to remind that not only this degradation is impacting on the capacity of these ecosystems to absorb carbon and have, play out their other vital functions, but it's also actually releasing the carbon that was sequestrated back into the atmosphere. So there is a double risk there. And also thank you for showing us some of the concrete examples of nature-based solutions in the sphere of coastal and marine ecosystems, and for providing a definition. You mentioned that it is important that you only considered nature-based solutions as those solutions that not only conserve the nature, but do have proven socioeconomic benefits. I'm wondering if actually, protecting nature does not always have some benefits for us if we only have a broad enough view, and if we only have a systemic enough view of what we're doing, which is a little bit the purpose also of the project underlying this workshop. But we'll get back to that later. And now let me turn to our second speaker, Chip Cunliffe. And with you, Chip, we have touched upon also some of the policy dimensions of nature-based solutions and how they can help build resilience. And we heard about, the benefits of this nature-based solutions, but can you tell us a little bit also about the financing side of the story? So what is actually preventing the upscaling of these solutions? And what are some of the new innovative solutions for financing that are being explored to help tackle and address some of these challenges? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Piera. Yeah, look, thank you very much for asking me to present today as well. It's an honor, of course. But I think it's probably best to start with the challenges, as you rightly point out. So I think that, well, I'm going to start with the insurance side, seeing as that's where I sit. But then I'll start to think about sort of, and I suppose the insurance side is more the risk side, but then we also have the investment side as well. So I'm going to look at both of those, and then I'll jump into some of the solutions. So look, I think on the risk side, I think it's really partly a lack of understanding about how nature-based solutions can be incorporated into general risk management frameworks. As you know, I'm sure you're aware, we have an annual process of pricing risk, and so very much focused on natural catastrophe, certainly within the area of the business I sit, rather than the slow onset risks like sea level rise or declines in biodiversity over the longer term. And so that day-to-day underwriting of risk is almost much like any other day. But of course, what we need to do is to start to identify what the opportunities would be for not only our clients, but also how that impacts ourselves and the business in the longer term as well. I think that sort of really relates to us having a sort of a focus more into the future, of course, but also, and that may link to how we view our own corporate responsibility. I think the second challenge from the risk side relates to science, and indeed the potentially lack of data and/or modelling capabilities to quantify the risk, including the nature-based solution. In fact, we're doing some work on that at the moment in integrating mangroves and reefs into our risk models, which actually will become something that will be useful, we hope, to those outside the business as well. So it'll be open source. But I think that there's a real need to look at the protective benefits of these ecosystems, and yet we don't quite know everything about the complexities in terms of the resilience values of, let's say, mangroves. So what wind strength allied to the wave energy would they no longer provide protection to assets on land? So those kind of things, there's some macro level thinking already being done, but we need to start thinking at the local level as well. So those are the two I see two elements of the risk side. On the investment side, I think it's probably a bigger, or there are more. I think there's certainly a lack of understanding in how investing in natural capital can provide that timely, and indeed I think that the market rate return that's required. It's a nascent area of investment, and so there's a lot more work to be done in that space. There's certainly a limited pipeline, and again, we hear this all the time. There's a limited pipeline of risk-adjusted investable projects that can attract financing. Again, something that we all are starting to think on. I think we probably sort of mirror the insufficient data and modeling, but this is more for the investment side in how they can quantify the ocean risk and return. And then I think probably as the last panel spoke about, was about the sort of the enabling policies in shifting investment possibly away from unsustainable infrastructure through to this more sort of sustainable nature-based solutions. And I think Catherine did a great job in talking about some of the numbers that are linked to this. And so just thinking about some of the solutions to scale up financing, I think that we can probably put this in two buckets. I think the first bucket is very much about, and it's an absolutely critical first step, is giving nature a dollar value. Again, Catherine went through that a little bit, but I think that by doing so, of course, we're able to then ensure the management and protection of ecosystems, because they are linked to a P&L. And I think that with the huge losses through anthropogenic impacts, then we need to be doing more to provide that dollar value to those ecosystems. Catherine, talked a little bit about the resilience and in fact the risk reducer really of ecosystems, and so you get that triple dividend of avoiding losses when disasters strike, stimulating the economic activity thanks to the fact that you do have a reduced disaster risk, but also the development co-benefits of a specific disaster risk management investment. And so, yes, you have that protective element, but of course, you also have that food and economic security through the tourism dollars that come in, carbon sequestration, as you just mentioned a second ago, but also filtering pollutants, etc. But as I said before, this is very much, we've done a lot of work, I think, at the large scale, at the macro level, and we now need to start focusing this really at the local scale, where certainly if we're talking about coral reefs and seagrass beds and mangroves, etc., that's where the small island developing states and the least developed countries are going to be able to most effectively incorporate them into their risk management protocols as well, and provide and also get that economic benefit. A couple of the examples I think about the economic side is piloting or blue carbon and resilience credits, and I'm very happy to go into more detail after this. It's the use of insurance for ecosystems to continue to provide value. So using parametric products potentially for coral reefs and or mangroves. We're also working to develop a coastal resilience bond at the moment. So all of these different things about really trying to create that value for those ecosystems. I mean, I think maybe even, I suppose this partly comes down to really trying to almost create its own asset class. Is it possible to do that? And AXA itself has put $350 million into a climate and biodiversity fund, where it is focusing on that protective benefit in the first instance. But I said there were two buckets, and the second one I think is about making this a public and private sector agenda item. So it's not solely sitting in one space. It very much sort of crosses over, and then you pull those two together to create that market. And as you mentioned at the beginning, I co-host or co-chair the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, which was launched at the UN in September 2019. And the idea is creating a multi-sectoral approach to driving a figure of $500 million into nature-based solutions by 2030. And so this is really about, bringing the public and private sector together alongside the NGO community and the scientific community to do that. So we've got 15 full members, 11 governments as observers, including all the G7 countries. We have delivery partners on the ground. And the three sort of pillars that Aura is focused on is very much about, in the first instance, financial innovation, so developing new products. And we looking to try and develop 15 of those before 2025. Developing that pipeline of projects as well that we can replicate and scale. And so the Canadian government has so far put some money in to help us scale up this idea of coral reef insurance, to develop this idea of blue carbon and resilience credits, micro insurance for small scale fishers in the Philippines. We've developed an innovation challenge. We talked about bonds, etc. So all of those different things are moving ahead. And of course, we need to be working outside of our silos to make this happen. We can't do it alone. Then we have a focus on science and research, and we're working with the Stockholm Resilience Centre to focus on ocean risk and the impacts on SIDS and LDCs more specifically, with a specific component actually on addressing the gender dimension, so the impact on women and girls more specifically. And then the last piece is about policy and governance, so helping to drive policy commitments towards NBS, towards nature, alongside the climate, of course, and the ocean and finance spheres, which I think is particularly important. And indeed, we're working in discussions with Steph and her team within the UK at the moment, also about some of the work that we're undertaking as well. So, look, that's a fairly broad overview, but I'm hoping that gives you a starter for 10.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was actually an excellent overview, a lot of food for thought. I think maybe just to recall a few points, I really liked what you mentioned about the difficulties, but also the importance of trying to capture ocean risk. And it is something that is not just relevant for nature-based solutions, also relevant for investing in any ocean-based sector. So even investing in fisheries, etc. We're not realizing that actually there are some liabilities that are not accounted for, just for the fact that ecosystems are really degraded, and we're not taking that into account in our investments. And also, I very much appreciated the point on moving now from the large scale to the local scale, and also the focus that some of the projects that you're also leading on have on the small island developing states. We had in the previous session a representative from Cabo Verde, and we know how all of these issues are very relevant for the small island developing states who are highly impacted by climate. And also thank you for highlighting some of the innovative financing mechanisms like blue carbon schemes, insurance schemes, and this new idea of having a coastal resilience bond. And I really hope that we have some time in this session to go further into the details of this. But before we do, let me now turn to our third speaker, Stephanie. So the UK is organizing together with Italy this year the COP26 that will take place in Glasgow. I think everybody here has very much their eyes on this. So in your view, Stephanie, what can nature-based solution? What is the role that nature-based solutions can play in building the international ambition on climate change at the upcoming COP26? And what ways can the international agreements there help to accelerate the uptake of nature-based solutions?
Thank you, Piera. And just to check you can hear me. Yeah, thank you. So greetings, everyone. And firstly, thank you to the OECD in Portugal for bringing us together today. We very much welcome all of the excellent work of the OECD on this agenda, at least not your sustainable ocean for all work, and very much welcome Portugal's leadership in raising the profile to this agenda and towards the UN Ocean Conference next year. It's a pleasure to join you all and also to follow This panel, Catherine, Chip have provided excellent presentations in terms of the role for nature, its benefits, its cost effectiveness, and some really key considerations from Chip in terms of how we can actually move forward in terms of actions and what needs to be done at the level of actually mobilising finance and actions for this. And certainly the UK is delighted to support this work and support the work of the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance as well. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. I'm going to share with you the UK's key priorities for ocean climate change and nature, not just looking at COP26, but throughout what we call this super year and beyond, and to alight upon a few key considerations for us around how we think we can really use this year to mobilise international ambition for nature-based solutions in the marine environment. So starting first with setting out our approach to the year. So we are, across the UK, really taking a holistic approach. This is both through our COP26 presidencies and also the G7 presidency, but also considering the range of key ocean negotiations that will be happening this year to advance our common ocean objectives, at least not under CBD and through BBNJ. I think a key golden thread across all of this and across the super year is really nature, and that's something we are in particular championing, and that importance of tackling climate change and biodiversity as two sides of the same coin. When it comes to COP26, the UK is really honoured to be the incoming presidency. The event is, or the negotiation is still scheduled for November in Glasgow in partnership with Italy. And we're really honoured to follow Chile in the footsteps of hosting the first Blue COP, COP25, which of course marked a step change in raising the profile of the ocean within the UNFCCC. And where we saw that first COP decision specifically on the ocean. For the UK, on the road to COP26, our priorities are on ambition, nature, adaptation and resilience, and of course, action, amongst a few other key ones, including finance as well. All of these can address the global and societal challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss. And all of these recognise those inextricable links between nature, climate, ocean health, resilience, and of course, livelihoods. I'm going to sort of unpack these a little bit and take them each in turn in terms of our key headline priorities. So firstly, on ambition, we are championing climate ambition as ocean ambition, recognising that securing ambitious, accelerated reductions in greenhouse gas emissions at COP26 is critical to protect the health of the ocean and to avoid further irreversible impacts of climate change. This could be considered as a #1 ocean priority. And in doing so, we're encouraging all countries to come forward with ambitious, nationally determined contributions, which of course can include ocean-related contributions where they can be robustly accounted for, as well as and alongside ambition on adaptation plans and strategies. On nature, so nature will be at the heart of our COP26 campaign, reflecting our priorities. We are championing the role of nature-based solutions, which can address these global and societal challenges, and we are really advocating for initiatives that can increase ambition and drive a step change, as we call it, in the delivery of nature-based solutions. And that's both across UNFCCC, but also CBD and the range of international meetings this year. When we talk about marine nature-based solutions, this includes marine protection and restoration alongside sustainable management practices, all of which have a crucial role to play as part of measures to support climate change adaptation, building greater resilience and providing mitigation services, whilst also providing those benefits to biodiversity, people and livelihoods. And you'll notice this emphasis that we give to nature and nature-based solutions. Whilst the term is often interchangeably used with blue carbon, we do recognise the sequestration benefits, but we think it's really important to recognise the substantial benefits and the synergies that these habitats offer to both adaptation, resilience and biodiversity loss, alongside the sequestration benefits alone. And then lastly, on adaptation and resilience, so we are really encouraging greater planning and action and finance at the local and national levels to adapt to and strengthen resilience to climate-related risks. This builds on the call of action that was launched at the UN Climate Action Summit in September 2019. And ultimately, the focus is to keep countries, communities and people safe from the impacts of climate change. And so you'll see across this that marine nature-based solutions, coastal resilience, blue carbon is all central to our ambitions here. Moving on, I'm going to touch upon a few key elements that we think are crucial for really championing actions, and both considering this kind of internationally as well as through sort of regional, local and national levels. We are working to consider this across the leadership, the international goals and targets, the implementation, and through finance, partnerships and science spectrums. And I'm going to focus on just 5 specific areas. There are many, but I'll just touch on a few key points that are central to our UK approach. And I think first off, our approach and focus here is really on recognising the role of nature, those synergies and raising this ambition at global level. And one key way that we're doing this in the UK is of course through our presidency, but also through key initiatives such as the Leaders Pledge for Nature that was launched at the UN General Assembly last year. Alongside WWF, the European Commission and Costa Rica, the UK led in its development and it's now supported by well over 80 signatories. The pledge aims to reset humanity's relationship with nature, to put biodiversity on a path to recovery, and to set a tone for a step change in global ambition for climate biodiversity, both on land and at sea. And it will support ocean health, resilience and recovery, encouraging coordinated action to maximise the benefits of tackling biodiversity loss and climate together. And so that for us is the key kind of strap line, I think, in terms of just recognising those synergies and recognising that at the global level. Second key focus for us is on recognising the importance of the Convention on Biological Diversity and its frameworks to establish targets to take forward actions, including on nature-based solutions. So this year, parties to CBD will be agreeing that new post-2020 framework to set the global agenda for the next decade. And under this, for the UK, we are seeking ambitious and transformational global biodiversity targets, including on nature-based solutions and marine protected areas. And in particular, in this regard, we recognise the vital role of marine protected areas as a nature-based solutions. And we are championing the global target to protect at least 30% of the global ocean by 2030, both through our Global Ocean Alliance and through the UK's co-chair of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People. And at the One Planet Summit in January, we were proud to announce the joining of these 2 alliances. The third key area I wanted to recognise was on the role for international development and cooperation and of course finance in this space. Catherine before me, and I'm sure through many of the presentations across this event, you've heard the case for the potential of nature-based solutions and its cost effectiveness, both the mitigation as well as crucially helping communities to adapt and build resilience in a changing world. And yet the share of finance, both public and private, is significantly lower than that evidence suggests. The UK is committed to doubling our international climate finance and spending a significant proportion of this uplift on nature. And in particular, I'm pleased to share that the UK has committed to establish a £500 million Blue Planet Fund that will support developing countries to protect their marine resources and reduce poverty across 4 key themes of climate change, marine pollution, overfishing and biodiversity loss. But we must mobilise resources on all fronts, both public and private, and as Chip really clearly articulated, if we are to meet our ambitions overall and to crucially rebuild economies as part of the recovery from the global pandemic as well. A fourth kind of key point, and I'll keep this brief, is the focus on partnerships and international collaborations on how we take our work forward. On behalf of the UK and through our work this year, we'll be really committed to working with partners to promote safe, healthy and sustainable oceans, of course, including nature-based solutions for climate, biodiversity and people. I'll keep this super brief, but I think Chip gave a really great elaboration of a key initiative and the partnership approaches needed, in particular in terms of bringing actors together, both public and private. And I think that needs to be a key element of our approach going forward. And then the final key point I really wanted to underscore was on the role of science, and in particular thinking about the UN decades. So the science is clear on that case for action, and Catherine really articulated the evidence here. The UN Decades of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development and Ecosystem Restoration start this year. And it's really important that we come together globally to collaborate on these and get behind these objectives to support the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, amongst many other key international agreements. The UK is committed to supporting these, and in particular, we're keen to really focus on that transformation of ocean science to support ocean actions, to really make sure that we have the science that drives the actions that we need in this critical decade. And so to conclude, we are now at the start of what we call the super year. 2021 needs to be the decade of ocean opportunity, but also the decade for action, the pathway to net zero, meeting our sustainable development goals, delivering against an ambitious global biodiversity framework, and delivering on ocean resilience can only be achieved by protecting and conserving nature on a massive scale. And whilst the future will be very different as a result of COVID-19, respecting, valuing and restoring nature will deliver a more resilient, sustainable blue and green recovery. Our ocean priorities on the road to COP26 across all agendas are on ambition, nature, adaptation and resilience, and of course, finance and actions. And in the UK, we're very much taking forward our programmes, the policy, the science in ways that bridge across the ocean, climate and nature agendas to really drive those synergies. In doing so, we'll be seeking to build momentum and advocate for greater action at all levels, championing global collaboration as well as partnership down to the local level. And no matter the scale of the challenges ahead, we really truly recognise that we can only overcome them by working in unison, and that's across all sectors of government, industry and society. And with that, I'll end there and thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for outlining the priorities of the UK for COP26, but also beyond. And it's great to hear about the new commitments about doubling climate finance and also the Blue Planet Fund that you have established. And really great to hear that nature will be at the core of these commitments and your engagement, because I think Catherine mentioned how disjoint the climate adaptation and mitigation agendas have been in the past, but also the climate and biodiversity agendas have been pretty disjoint, and this is something that we definitely need to be making more progress against. So I would like now to turn to some of the questions from our participants. So I see, I'm just going to read a couple of questions, which I think could be addressed by any of the speakers. So the first one is, blue carbon stocks offer one of the major nature-based solutions to carbon sequestration. Most of these stocks are in tropical countries. Is there any effective policy support to leverage this vital resource for climate change adaptation? And also, what are the chances of carbon trading being used for conserving cost of vegetation in the form of mangroves and seagrasses for climate change adaptation? So whoever would like to start with these two questions, if you have any reflections. Maybe Catherine? if I can call on you.
You may, Piera. Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Thanks for raising it. And I think it's an important question of how to make use of this potential globally. So it's absolutely right to sort of point to those areas in which we have great, potentially unexploited potential, and think of ways to address that, either through development cooperation or through other multilateral or bilateral development cooperation, or through other means of supporting those countries in leveraging the contribution they can make through their ecosystems. I guess whether the concrete proposals of trading is a good idea is part of a larger subject to larger negotiations. They're not just part of NBS, but also other sources of carbon. And I guess this is subject to a larger debate that we haven't touched upon in our work specifically.
Would somebody else want to chip in at this stage? Stephanie or Chip on this?
Only briefly, but you know, I think that in terms of the carbon side, you know, especially when we're looking at, I suppose mangroves. I think at this stage, you know, I know that you know, we've been working with the Nature Conservancy on developing I go back to what Steph says about you know, that the resilience and adaptation link to mangroves alongside the carbon link, which is why we've sort of started to develop this idea of a blue carbon and resilience credit. And so we've got a couple of pilot projects being developed at the moment, one in Virginia actually, and another in Belize, and indeed a third where we're identifying an area in the Bahamas through some support from the government of Canada. And all of that really sort of is focusing on, yeah, the resilience benefits. And indeed, we're just in the sort of final throes of having that element of the credit verified as a methodology. So once that's been done, then we can really sort of integrate both the blue carbon and the resilience benefits into this. Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily into one, but you can fit them both together, and that's key and critical. The difficulty at the moment, of course, is that you know, there isn't we can only do this so on the voluntary carbon markets, and you know, that's something that we want to, you know, we need to move forward. And indeed identify other potential ways of scaling that current pilot or those current pilots. I think we're probably, you know, a good few years behind where we'd like to be, of course, as is the way. But you know, conscious that there are various organizations, private and public, who are really trying to drive this forward. And you know, again, I go back to the whole idea of needing to do so alongside others as well.
Yes. Stephanie, would you like to add?
Thanks. I'll just very briefly add, as Catherine and Chip have really well articulated, and as the questions point to as well, I think it's that importance of combining both the carbon sequestration benefits and recognising those alongside adaptation and resilience, both in project design, both in terms of recognising the value to local communities, and as Chip pointed there, kind of recognising the need to tap into all funding sources, really to get projects off the ground, and in particular thinking about some of those really innovative instruments that are coming out now that combine both the carbon market elements with the sort of the risk and resilience side as well. I think it's a kind of a really interesting area and can only be done when we consider things holistically.
Thank you. So let me turn now to another question. I'm just going to read it out loud again, and we'll elicit your views. So the question is, what governance processes have to be strengthened to ensure the benefits from nature-based solutions are equitably distributed the portion of society bearing the largest burden of constraints. And I think in a way, I don't know if I was the only one reading that, but in the previous question, focusing also on tropical areas, I kind of heard some kind of also, you know, global distributional dimension there, which we haven't really discussed. And now we're discussing, you know, more the distribution within country, the distributional dimensions within the country. So, and with a focus on governance processes. So may I ask you to chip in on this one? Who would like to start? I see Catherine raising her hand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jack, for raising that question. It's something that I didn't get to in my presentation because it was a bit too much to cover, but something that we obviously focused our work on since a long time, since we've been working on questions around climate risks at the OECD. And I think the point you raise is critically important, because what we see in research is that indeed, where we allocate our investments for nature-based solutions and other coastal protection measures are hugely skewed to those that have how should I say, the most effective voice when it comes to those decision-making processes. And there is indeed a whole political economy narrative that can be built around it and that has been built by academia. And what we are suggesting for countries to do is to render information more transparent. It's important for coastal communities to have an idea of where the hazardous areas are and what coastal protection can bring to different areas in terms of the cost benefits and their payoffs. And that should obviously not only consider economic assets in big agglomerations, but the environmental value and co-benefits that brings for whole coastal areas. And we think that it's crucial to bring in transparency into hazard in terms of vulnerabilities and exposure. So A, to know what is exposed to those risks, but B, also what are the underlying vulnerabilities in terms of the adaptive capacities of communities in different areas. And once you have this information, you will render transparent where priorities for policymakers should actually be. So that's the first part. The first part is introducing transparency in the information we've got. And we've got a whole lot of information, I should say. So there's more information, I think, that we would like to acknowledge or are often sort of mentioning. There's a lot of information, it needs to be triangulated, and it needs to be rendered accessible to communities that have a stake in that. That's the first point. And I think the second point then, and this brings a bit raises a bit the issue of coastal zone management in general. Coastal zone management is unfortunately not the trade and the decision-making process of one sector alone. And by all means, nature-based solutions is the typical case in point that it's not one specific sector. It's not the environmental agency that is responsible for that coastal area that will be able to take a decision alone. It's a decision-making process that includes land use planning, which is critical, and it's obviously critically managed in most countries that we know at the local level. So there's a subnational interest at stake that need to be integrated with national priorities on coastal protection. Then there are, as I mentioned in my presentation, a number of sectors that need to be integrated if you want to get them on board, and if you want to make sure that, as we've been mentioning in our presentations, that they chip into the financing and supporting those measures, because they can be crucial stakeholders, in fact, that can block for example, rendering areas available to create nature-based solutions, or accepting a trade-off such as, for example, for farmers in terms of having their land be used for example, wetland protection, or using them as flood areas in case of, and so forth. So it's crucial to have an integrated approach with all those stakeholders. I think these are two core components. Have we figured out yet of how we do this and how successfully we integrate these policies? I don't think so. And I think a lot of work is needed. There's recognition that nowadays climate resilience should be part of integrated coastal zone planning and management. But whether this is actually done in practice, I think is still subject to an in-depth evaluation and to sort of policy guidance that we need to provide to countries.
Thank you, Catherine. Can I invite our other two speakers, Stephanie and Chip, also to add anything they would like to add to this?
So I think Catherine gave a great articulation there. There are so many different considerations, and I think it's really a case of just making sure they're all thought through, and kind of in a partnership aspect in terms of considering all these things together when it comes to actually moving to delivery on the ground.
Yeah, and I think just adding to that, I think that there's a real critical element of working with project partners on the ground, so within the communities that are likely to be impacted. So yes, I think you have the big wider scale, as I think we've mentioned before, but then when it comes to identifying communities that will be impacted most, or not necessarily impacted most, but impacted at all, then I think you need the likes of the NGO community that are working in those areas where they have a good understanding of the implications of, from a societal, economic and environmental perspective. So I think that, governance really, it flows through from top down and bottom up.
Thank you. And Chip, may I also ask you, to touch upon not only the populations that are most affected, but also the countries that are most affected. And so how the projects that you're working on are also dealing and working with small island developing states. I know that there is a little bit of a focus there on your work. So if you could tell us a little bit more on this, will be really interesting for us.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that there's a lot of the work that we're focused on is sort of around of course ocean issues, nature-based solutions, mangroves, reefs, etc. And so we have a particular focus on LDCs and SIDS, and that I think is critical for all of us. I talked a little bit about the blue carbon work. We're also working on some micro-insurance for small-scale fishers in the Philippines, really to provide them with the I suppose adaptive capacity of being able to deal with climate disasters. And so if fisher folk were to have their boats or fishing nets, etc., destroyed, then utilizing micro-insurance as a way to getting themselves back on their feet, rather than having to be lent or to go to local lenders at extortionate rates. So really sort of integrating them into the more formal economy, I suppose. But also looking at some of the work on mangroves, mangrove insurance, and indeed potentially scaling the idea of a coral insurance policy as well. And I think this is very much, we obviously know the geographies where these ecosystems are, and that tends to be, of course, in the tropical belt. And that being the case, we need to develop, we need to be innovative to really move the dial in this space. And so some of the work we've done on mangrove, or at least on the idea of a mangrove insurance product, has been in the Caribbean, and identifying the cost of restoration of mangroves themselves. You're looking at what, $23,000 in the rest of the Caribbean, about $45,000 per hectare in Florida. But you look at the cost of a sea-wall, and if you're doing that over a similar area, then you're looking at $20 million, or whether you're in the Caribbean or whether you're in Florida, it doesn't really matter. The costs are fairly similar actually there. But then you look at the cost of or the resilience benefits that those mangroves provide, and they are over and above the amount of money that it costs to restore those. So we think, and we know, well, we've done some research on the opportunity of developing this product. We've looked at the market, certainly in the Caribbean at this stage. We're looking at what scientific elements we need now to develop the product further, more granularity. We're looking potentially at a parametric and indemnity product, so one that pays out having linked to a parameter, whether that's wind speed or something similar, and then identifying the kind of the policy holder. And at the moment, we're probably looking at the municipalities or states, only for the fact that going into the private market is going to be very difficult at this stage. But we need to, as has happened with Swiss Re and the coral reef insurance across Mexico, well, not across Mexico, but in Quintana Roo, we need to get this stake in the sand, and we need to know that it works, and from there we can start to redevelop and scale it into different geographies. And so that's exactly what we want to try and do here. Once we've determined that this is a possibility, and we've probably got another maybe 12 to 15 months to go on this side, but then we're going to start to look at how we replicate that into different parts of the world. And I think that's really exciting, and we certainly want to identify the countries that would like to partner with us on all of these kind of things. And that's exactly where Aura comes in, is about identifying this pipeline of products and developing that alongside governments and private sector entities. So if there are those from the global south who want to be involved and would like to pilot some of these things, we would be very keen to hear from you.
Thank you, Chip. And can I also ask you, because you mentioned coral reef insurance products a number of times, and we know that even if we stay within the 1.5 degrees increase, actually, there's a likelihood that we will be losing 90% of the world coral reefs. So from an economics and insurance perspective, how do you take that risk into account?
Yeah, look, I mean, at the moment, it's based on natural catastrophe. So we're looking at this as what's called cat in a box. So a catastrophe in a certain area, and the parametric product is based on wind speed. So the Quintana Roo product paid out in, I think it was October, November time last year, after Hurricane Delta went through. Paid out, I think, $800,000 to $900,000, and that was based on, I think, the parameter being hit was a Cat 3 cyclone or hurricane, and so at the moment it's based upon that. But of course, what we're starting to think about, not necessarily us at AXA, but others are starting to think about, well, what are the other parameters that we could potentially use as a way of determining loss, and is that about is that coral bleaching? Is that about the sea surface temperatures or temperatures of ocean waters over a 3 to 5 week period or whatever it might be? So those sort of things are starting to be integrated into our planning or our thinking as a collective insurance industry focus, and I think that I know that there's this 50 reefs program where they've identified where they think that the 50 most resilient reefs are, and of course there are various other programs at the moment focused on investing in reefs as well. So there's a lot going on. I think specifically to your point, I think there are various elements that we are working on at the moment to determine whether we can go from that wind speed parameter into others.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to ask everybody a question that links up a little bit to where we're started in the workshop. So I think the COVID-19 crisis really has drawn everybody's attention on the interconnectedness of the natural ecosystems with our human-made systems. And this is something we really talked about also in the first session of this workshop, saying how actually these have in a way been conceived and developed as they were two separate identities, while these systems interact, are very much interconnected. So do you think that this, the interconnectedness of the natural system with the human-made systems that has been brought to everybody's attention with COVID-19 in a way has been helpful in maybe emphasizing more the importance of nature-based solutions? Or are there ways that we can use this to leverage greater attention on nature-based solutions? Maybe Stephanie can ask.
Yes, Stephanie,
go first.
Thank you. So I think, of course, globally, we've all been rocked, and for each and every one of us, our lives have changed owing to the global pandemic. And I'm sure we'll sort of wish back and think the world was different. But as you alluded to, I think there are some potential silver linings, but I think the course isn't clear cut. And I think to keep it short, I think certainly what we've seen is that greater connection of people to nature, both, well, on many different levels, but it's certainly been seen as a topic that's rising in prominence. And that public will is going to be really important for the many key international environmental agreements that we need to secure this year. And so I think that's the positive. I think the key consideration is actually making sure we build back better, and that any kind of economic impacts that ensue from this current situation aren't to the detriment of that. There are many synergies, there are many opportunities here. Presenters have brought them out today in terms of those opportunities, but it is a step change from how we've been living currently. And I think it's really important that we kind of actually all kind of recognize that and make that change. It's not going to happen by itself. And just that recognition of the links to nature alone aren't going to drive the change. It's actually really important that there are marked changes in everything that we do.
Thank you, Stephanie. Catherine?
Yes. In German, we say that this what you're asking is a bit the Gretchenfrage, so it's a bit the key question, and I think all of us were hoping that yes, the pandemic has helped us make a point about what it means to be confronted with, and Chip, there I use your language, I guess, to a sort of a low probability, high risk event, and to sort of draw attention to what this could mean, because it's very, very difficult for us sometimes to make a case of something that we know as scientists and academics, but to turn that into a real policy priority if such a high degree of uncertainty and oftentimes such a low probability, or in fact, we recognize that those probabilities are increasing, but still in relative terms, this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow or in the next 10 years. So if it is happening in the next 50 years, there's a sort of a rational ignorance in terms of accepting certain risks. So that's definitely something that we're hoping has added to us making that point. But more importantly, what we see now across OECD countries and certainly also in a context of development cooperation, is that the massive sort of recovery efforts that countries are undertaking they're sort of recognizing that it's a crucial shift in the pathways that we can take, and they're steering it in our direction, and they're sort of waving at us saying, look, we want to support a green recovery, we want to set incentives that way. And I think now we as sort of intermediaries to policymakers, we have a key role to play to support countries in actually making use of the opportunity that they're given, and sort of rapidly scale up if, when we look at the weaknesses that we see and the lack of sort of capacities that we see, lack of policies in support of that. So to help them rapidly ramp up their sort of enabling environment to make those happen. I see that as our role, and I see that there's key opportunities lying ahead of us in the next few years as part of these massive recovery efforts, and obviously as part of all of the discussions that we've been mentioning today at the international level. That all of us, I think, are great windows that are opening for us, and we're very keen to help countries leveraging them for them.
Thank you, Catherine. So I will ask Chip to come in.
Yeah, well, just briefly then. Look, I sort of echo what Stephanie said regarding sort of Build Back Better, and indeed, I think that that's exactly what we're probably starting to look at already, which is great. I think that in reality, I think that there's been a lot of work being done over the course of the last sort of 12 to 15 months or so in this. And in fact, the fact that we haven't been able to travel probably means that we've been doing more work at our computers anyway. And that being the case, I think there's been a lot of work on this that just is continuing, and indeed part of, and I think that's probably given us the opportunity to move this along slightly further than we would have done if we'd been sort of on aeroplanes and going between meetings in person. So I think that actually we're probably driving this slightly quicker than we might have done over the last 12 months, or I hope that's the case. But I think that, yeah, there's certainly opportunity to redefine maybe, or realign, it's probably a better word, our focuses and priorities.
Thank you so much, Chip. And thank you so much to all of our speakers for this very rich discussion, extremely interesting. And thank you to all the participants in the session. I think it's really been a very rich discussion, and I really hope that this will be a key discussion that will really help us make the much needed progress into better understanding the nexus between the ocean and climate, and really understanding ocean issues in a more systemic way. So with this, again, thank you so much to our speakers. And let me now invite Anthony Cox, our Deputy Director of the Environment Directorate, and Duarte Bue Alves, Deputy Permanent Representative of Portugal to the OECD and expert on ocean and champion of the global ocean agenda, to provide their concluding remarks for the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Piera. Can you hear me? Anthony, can you just nod if you, okay, yes. Good conditions. Thank you all, and thank you everybody. And I'd like to start, of course, by thanking all the participants that during these 2 days have followed this webinar, and of course our colleagues and friends from the Secretariat, namely through Rodolfo Lacey and Jorge Moreira da Silva, to the teams of both ENV and DCD for their engaged support in organizing this webinar. And of course, last but not least, to all the speakers that kindly accepted our invitation to participate in this panel, in these panels, plural, during these 2 days. Before I pass the floor to my colleague and friend Anthony Cox for the next steps on this project, I would like to try to briefly sum up what we've heard in these 2 days. I followed with great attention and the interest and enthusiasm the participation of all the speakers, and there is some ideas I'd like to highlight. We started with William yesterday, who brought us the economic perspective, and working for NAEC within OECD, he gave us a sign of alert using a very interesting expression, in my opinion, which was cascading failures, and that gives us a sense of alert of what is at stake. And if we are facing a state of alert, cascading failures, then, as Elena Martins said, we need to communicate, and we need to communicate efficiently. And Elena is a science communicator, and she brought this perspective, and by explaining us how relevant are the tipping points we are facing, and the urgency to cut down emissions. From a fisheries perspective, Ron from Iceland, she's an expert on fisheries, and explained us why and what are the consequences of climate change in what has to do with a specific field, which is fisheries, and explained the phenomenon of fish migration. Namely, she mentioned cod, and being from Portugal, being a Portuguese, and we are top world consumers of cod, namely from Iceland, from where we import lots of cod. This obviously must ring a bell to all of us. I'm not following the speakers by the order of their interventions, but as Ron spoke about cod and fisheries, that was also touched upon by Susie from Indonesia today, when she highlighted the enormous importance of IUU, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, as we all know, is part of Agenda 2030, SDG 14.4. One of the targets we have to achieve by the end of this cycle is to completely eliminate IUU, as Susie rightly pointed out. Also in the field of fisheries, Svein also recalled us the importance of the precautionary principle and the need to implement best practices. And I think this is particularly relevant because best practices are at the core of OECD. OECD is all about sharing best practices amongst member states and learning, peer learning with what other colleagues and member states are doing. Natalie also mentioned fishing among other sectors when she went one by one through the different sectors that are impacted, the different sectors in blue economy that are impacted by climate change. She also alluded to not only to fishing, but to the species migration that Ron had spoken about the day before. And she mentioned a very specific point, which is particularly important, which is the role of financial actors and the need for sustainable financing and also blue carbon, something that was touched upon by several speakers and something that the OECD has been working also a field that OECD has also been covering. That somehow drives us to the intervention of Chip today when he spoke about the risks and the risk models coming from the private sector and from the insurance. He gave us the perspective of insurance companies and how much they are involved nowadays and looking at this phenomena. He also spoke to something that is particularly relevant. I recall that Jorge Moreira da Silva wrote an article about it a few weeks ago about natural capital, and Chip used an expression I wrote down: give nature a dollar value. And Chip, if you allow me, I surely use this expression in other occasions and other fora. All this was particularly eloquently put in a very systematic way by Catherine this afternoon when she specifically focused on these impacts on coastal areas and the impact of coastal effects of climate change in population, in economic activities, in blue economy, in infrastructures. And if I may share with you a particular experience from my country, we know today that Portugal, for example, has lost 13 square kilometers in the last years. 13 square kilometers of our country just disappeared because of sea level rise, because of extreme weather events. And that specific phenomenon that Catherine spoke about in coastal areas drove me back to what we heard yesterday, for example, from Vasco from Portugal, when he spoke about the importance of maritime spatial planning as a tool to combat climate change, knowing that, as Vasco said yesterday, the ocean climate nexus has escaped to a large extent international law. Also today, we've heard from Malik from Cape Verde what they are doing in Cape Verde regarding blue economy models, about a blue economy observatory that was created in Cabo Verde, and also what Georg from Norway told us about yesterday in what has to do with a high-level panel that the government of Norway has created together with another 13 countries, including Portugal, and the final synthesis report when the panelists spoke about protect effectively, produce sustainably, and prosper equitably. Two final notes, because this is not possible to do. I mean, normally these discussions bring together academia, politicians, diplomats, economists, expert researchers, but Kate Sharon from Canada recalled us the importance of engaging in a permanent dialogue with coastal communities. And she shared with us a successful story of Truro in Canada, Nova Scotia, where she has been working, engaged with local communities. But because now it's time for action, I would end up with the last speaker of our webinar, Stephanie, because of the COP26 that is taking place in Glasgow later this year in November. And Stephanie recalled us the importance to mobilize attention for COP26 at all levels and bring together all stakeholders to make sure that COP26 is a successful story. So summing up, lots of ideas. Let's make them fly. Thank you all again, all the speakers, but also all the participants who have engaged with the speakers via several questions that the moderators put to the speakers. Let's make these ideas fly, and let's also recall that now we are opening the decade for the ocean, for sustainable ocean, and make sure that when we come to the end of this decade, all this was worth doing, because I'm sure that from what we have heard in the last 2 days, the ideas and the will we have are as powerful as the ocean. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Duarte, and congratulations on providing a very crisp and concise and engaging summary of what has been a very rich and fruitful 2 days of discussions. It's a very hard job to do that summary. You've done an excellent job, so we very much appreciate that. And we do appreciate Portugal's support for this workshop and for the work on the ocean at the OECD. My job now is to talk a bit about the next steps. As was highlighted at the start of this workshop, this work we're doing on the ocean climate nexus and resilience is being done under the auspices of a horizontal project within the OECD on integrating climate and economic resilience in the transition to a low carbon economy. So the aim of this workshop was to bring out the key issues in this nexus between climate and the ocean, and to bring these ideas to the fore so that we can then feed them into the discussion going forward as we frame up and implement this horizontal project in the broader context of the OECD. And there are 4 key axes along which we'll be taking this forward. One is around the science. We've heard a lot in the last few days about tipping points, feedbacks, non-linearities, but also the impact on people and well-being, on the environment, and the links into industry and innovation and infrastructure. we'll also be looking at how the ocean plays a role in resilience when you think about mitigation and adaptation. And when it all comes down to it, we need to find a way in which we move this into an integrated approach to policy making. What can we advise our governments in terms of how they approach the ocean as part of a broader resilience agenda? The other thing that has been very clearly expressed in the last 2 days is the question of scale. And this was in the first session where the point was made very strongly that climate is a global stressor, but we have impacts occurring at regional and local levels. And so a differentiated approach is clearly necessary. These feedback loops and tipping points are not all global, they occur at local level as well. And so we need to have a more nuanced approach to this. And this is going to be an important part of our work going forward. And then there's a lot of work around, a lot of discussion in the last 2 days about a range of issues which are all going to impinge on the way in which we develop the policy toolkit for doing this. Nature-based solutions, marine spatial planning, infrastructure investment, integrated governance models, ecosystems-based fisheries management. These kind of concepts and more are going to play a crucial role going forward. So the next step for us, we will be preparing a summary of this workshop that brings together the excellent range of ideas and thoughts and tantalizing prospects for future work. And this will then feed into our broader project. And we will be
looking forward to staying in touch with all our colleagues who participated in this workshop. There will be this summary paper will be made available on the website. So please keep an eye out for the website for this paper as we go forward. So with that, it remains for me to just thank from the OECD side all the speakers, the panelists, and the moderators who participated, who took the time to join us for these last 2 days. To you, the audience, for your great participation and the voluminous questions that were coming through. We couldn't do justice to all of them, but it showed a high level of engagement, and we really do appreciate that. And the organising team of Andrew Prague, Kate Cooker, Neve Higgins-Lavery, Christina Theophilidou, and of course Duarte, who played a crucial role in helping us put this together. And finally, of course, the interpreters who helped us make sure that this was a dual language event. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone and wish you all the very best for the future. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and we look forward to seeing you again in a next event on the blue economy and the ocean going forward. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Wonderful. Thanks.